What's up guys, it's Rowan here from AOSTV. Now I hear stories where students have turned down scholarships at universities like Macquarie, where I am today, UTS, Western Sydney, because they really want to go to Sydney University, UNSW, Melbourne or ANU. In other words, they've turned down a scholarship, a lot of money, a lot of opportunity to go to a bigger brand university. Does brand actually matter? Right, that's what we're going to look at here. It doesn't matter what university you go to, and doesn't matter what brand the university has in terms of your long term. Let's find out in this video, because I'm going to share with you when brand does matter, but also when brand doesn't matter, to help you make a better decision about what course and what university you attend when you finish school. So the first thing that you really need to think about is that ultimately it's not your friends' opinions that matter. It's not whether or not your friends think a university's cool, or if you get to wear a hoodie, right, with brand name university on the front so that you can walk around looking cool. Ultimately, you're going to university because you want to get a job, right? I'm assuming so. And so therefore, the opinion that really matters is the opinion of employers and what they say. And they're going to have a very different opinion relating to brand than what you or your friends might have or believe. Now, it's really interesting. There's a think tank and research organisation called the Grattan Institute that are based in Melbourne. And they did a study recently, which was published in the Sydney Morning Herald, which looked at, to what degree does the university you attend matter, right? And that was matter in terms of employability and salary earnings as well. And what they found was really interesting. They found that the university you attended didn't matter. What did matter though was the degree that you studied. And I think this is important because if you speak to employers, that's something that they understand themselves as well, that actually the degree matters more than the overall brand that a university may have. So employers understand and realise that certain universities have expertise in producing really fantastic graduates in certain faculties. And that's the really important part here. It's about the specific faculties rather than the overall brand of a university. So as an example, a university might have a fantastic overall brand, but they might actually suck at a particular faculty and discipline. And employers may not actually want to hire graduates from that university as much because the university doesn't have a specialisation or an expertise in that area. So, for example, UTS as a university is fantastic and has an amazing reputation for engineering graduates. So does Wollongong University. On the flip side, Macquarie, where I'm today, has a really fantastic reputation for producing fantastic psychologists and actuaries and geologists. So my point being here is that often the broad brand that you think about relating to universities doesn't actually connect to what employers look at more specific faculty level. And so what you need to be thinking about is, for the degree that you're wanting to study, what's the university's reputation for the degree, not overall. And so one of the ways that you can identify that is to go and look at the global rankings for universities, because they actually go down to a granular level, down to faculty level, so that you can actually see how does the faculty itself rate and rank globally and then in Australia, so that you can get a better sense of which faculty and which university has the strength in that particular faculty. Now, of course, the next best thing and perhaps even more important is see if you can go and speak to some employers. Find out from them, okay, is there a university that they tend to prefer because of the type of graduates that university produces? Because I think what you'll find is that actually some of the big universities, the Ivy Leagues, the Sandstones, the Sydney, the Melbourne, the ANU, the UNSW, which are fantastic universities for many things, aren't actually going to necessarily be the best choice for certain degrees that you may want to do. And there may be other universities that are just as good, maybe not overall from a brand point of view, but specifically for the degree that you want to study. So that's principle number one. You need to look at the specific degree, not the total university, because that's going to be more important. So do you want to be a small fish in a big pond, or a big fish in a small pond? Right, one of the challenges with going to one of the bigger universities that have maybe the really big brand. So let's just say it's a Sydney Uni, it's a UNSW, it's a Melbourne, it's an ANU, the Ivy Leagues, for example, in Australia, the Sandstones, is that you're a small fish in a big pond. You're one of many students, and that can mean that you don't build as strong relationships with the academics, and you don't get as many great opportunities as you might if you were a big fish in a small pond. So you're going to a smaller university where you might get more opportunities. And I see this happen all the time. I see students that elect, either because of a certain degree or a scholarship opportunity, to go to a smaller university, right? So, Macquarie or UTS, hardly small universities, but certainly I think from speaking to students, considered maybe not quite the same as a sandstone university. And yet, because these students are a bigger fish, so to speak, in a smaller pond, they really reap so many more benefits. So as an example, they build better relationships with the academics at the university, which then leads to greater opportunities long-term in the job market and with, sort of postgraduate study and PhD. Secondly, they also get more leadership opportunities because, they're maybe standing out a little bit more at the small university. They're the go-to person, the university ambassador, they're featured in all of the university sort of magazines, and they get more speaking opportunities at events. And the whole point here is that they get a lot more opportunity to actually develop and distinguish and differentiate themselves because they're the bigger fish in the smaller pond. And so this is actually where it can be really, really beneficial and strategic to go to a university that isn't necessarily, the Ivy League of Australia or the Sandstone, because of the fact that you're going to actually get more support and get better opportunities. What if you want to work overseas? So your thinking might be, well, I want to go and get a job globally somewhere. And so really that means that to give myself the best chance of getting that job, I want to have the most recognizable university name brand on my resume, right? And that sort of makes practical sense, doesn't it? It's why most people choose ultimately, right, to go to a UNSW, a USYD, an ANU, a Melbourne University, because they've got that global brand. They're ranked the highest in Australia in terms of global rankings. But honestly, right, is that actually how you get a job when you go to work overseas? Well, look, in some cases it might be you apply directly to the company and they're looking at your CV and they look at your degree and they go, well, Sydney Uni, UNSW, like recognizable names. But honestly, what's going to make the bigger difference is your work experience. They're going to be looking much more at what work you have done and who you have done it for. And in fact, I have plenty of friends, so many friends that have worked overseas, right? The US, the UK, throughout Asia, Hong Kong, China. And in most cases, in almost all cases, the way they got their job was that they worked for a company in Australia first that was a multinational that had offices overseas, and they got the job here. And then they transferred offices and then they did work in the US or in China or wherever the country was. And then once they were there, they then looked and jumped ship to go to other employment opportunities. And so my point in sharing all of this is that yes, having a globally recognized brand does matter to an extent if you want to work globally. So if you're thinking, yes, I want to get overseas fast, having a global brand name as your university can help. But ultimately, what is going to make the biggest difference over time is ultimately the experience that you have, the companies that you have worked for. And if you're working for a big multinational, they have a global brand in and of themselves. And so that's the way that you can actually balance it. Go to a great Australian university and then work for a multinational that has a global brand. And then you've got really what you need anyway to make that transition to working overseas. So the fourth principle to think about here in terms of whether branding matters or not for your university is the question of whether or not you want to go into research. So you might be thinking, great, I want to go into university, I want to be an academic, I want to do postgraduate study, I want to get my PhD, and then I want to be a full-time researcher. And so to what extent does it matter there? Well, look, to a degree, certainly, right? The better ranked globally your university is, the better it is, because ultimately a lot of your work as a researcher will take you global. Right? It's a really, really key part of going and being an academic. Will end up being traveling and working at different universities around the world. And of course, having a stronger global brand can help here. But being really honest, once again, academics also know, right, which universities have a better reputation for certain things, because certain universities will produce much more research on certain topics. So even though they might have a great brand, overall, they might not be particularly well known for a particular field. So you could go to Sydney Uni, for example, or Melbourne University, and actually find out that a plane is going past. Let's forget the plane. My point being is you could end up going, studying at Sydney University because you think the brand's great, but then discover that they produce hardly any research in that area, and no one really cares about you in the academic circles globally because your university doesn't have a brand for that particular area. So really, once again, nailing the specific faculty and making sure that the university has a reputation for that specific degree and research area is really more important overall than necessarily the total global rank. Although, ideal world, if you're wanting to go into research, you're probably wanting to find the best of both, right? A university that's got a great global rank and also happens to be freaking amazing at the area that you want to focus on. But that's not always possible because some more small and niche universities ultimately have a niche, right? They're an expert in certain areas, and so you might not be able to get both. And that's okay as long as you know that the university is an expert in the area that you're interested in pursuing to be an academic in. So that is the final principle. So overall, what I hope this has got you thinking about is that honestly, it's not the university that matters as much, it's the degree that you do, and then what reputation that university has in that degree. And ultimately, that's going to vary a lot. A university might have a poor overall brand, but might be great at a particular area, and vice versa. So it really shows that you need to do your research really, really critically. Don't write off a university because your friends sort of like raise an eyebrow or laugh or scoff at you because it's not the Ivy League sandstone. The critical thing is over the long term, it's not your friends' opinions that matter about which university you go to or how cool you look wearing, the hoodie with, the brand university name on it. It's actually more important what employers think ultimately, because they're the ones that, that are going to be paying you, and you're ultimately going to university to get a job, I'm assuming. So if you have any questions about this, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your questions. If you have any experiences navigating this journey as well, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Leave a comment. Of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. We do videos every single week, and that means I will see you next week.